Hello and welcome to the Electronic Eremite Reviews. I'm your host, the Electronic Eremite. This episode I'll be talking about Axis and Allies 1940. Few games elicit such a visceral response as the Axis and Allies series, with either amazing supporters who just think it is the best game and will want to play it constantly despite its obvious warts, or on the other side, people who wouldn't touch it with a 20-foot pole or even play the game if they were paid to do so. It has been probably over a decade since I have played Axis and Allies. I'm sort of in the middle, I suppose, of this two-side war. I neither, in a sense of ambivalence, I neither go out of my way to play Axis and Allies, but I don't hate it. In fact, I used to very, very much love it, and it was one of my family's old traditional standbys. Now, the game has changed a lot since then, at least in the way it looks, and in smaller additions. The rule set, I would say, is largely the same with some very key differences. But the game itself has been split up now into two different sides of the world, where you have Europe 1940 and Pacific 1940. This is the sort of latest edition. I am today looking at Europe 1940, and I understand, I have not seen Pacific 1940, but I do understand that there were some changes even between those two, although typically Europe carries on with whatever Pacific 1940 added. Now, I do have a caveat, and it is a major one for Axis and Allies Europe 1940, and that is it is out of print. So it is difficult to find if you are looking for a copy. Particularly, you might be doing so if you have Pacific 1940 and you want to merge the two, something I will discuss. It is out of print, so it is very difficult to find at a cheap price. However, apparently we will see the release of Europe 1941. I believe that was slated for this summer, although I haven't heard much more in the way of news about that. The last word I'd heard is that that will be this summer. There will be some major changes in that, including a possible shorter game variant, which is something that the Axis and Allies system really needed. Well, let me turn this off. I will set some pieces up and let you see what you're getting if you can get your hands on a copy of Europe 1940. Alright, welcome back. What you're looking at is the magnificent board of Axis and Allies Europe 1940. This is a game that's produced by Hasbro Wizards of the Coast, and I will say that I think most Hasbro Wizards of the Coast games have very high production values. There are some minor caveats to that. Usually you don't see high quality cards, not something that you are going to see in Axis and Allies, as there are no cards, and sometimes the cardboard can be a little thin, but as far as the art design and the color and what really goes into these boards to make a presentable board, I'm very well pleased with that. And Axis and Allies Europe 1940 is no exception to that. As you can see, this board actually comes in two boards. I just recently reviewed GMT's 1989, and I was saying how big that board was. I believe that one of these dual boards is actually almost the same size as that. I'll pull this over. You can see it goes all the way to the eastern side of the United States and Brazil, to all of Africa, but you still can't see. It's such a large map. Most of Europe, all of Europe, and most of what I meant was Eastern Europe and Russia. It is cut off. That is because if you do own Axis and Allies Pacific 1940, you can actually create an entire world map, which you would need a gigantic table or just lay it on the floor, as this would be a huge giant map. I think that is a really neat thing. It would create a game, in my humble opinion, that would be almost unbearably complex and long, but I do understand that the need for a global war scenario is one that makes Axis and Allies series kind of neat. In the original version, at least as far as I'm remembering the one I played, it was an entire world. I almost was going to say that I think that there are fewer zones and that it was more zoomed in, but that's not actually true. I think that this board, I haven't had a chance to count because I don't have the original with me anymore, but I do believe that this Axis and Allies Europe 1940 board has almost the same amount of zones, just in a zoomed in and split up more than as the original. But I can't really tell because I don't have those to compare. So really the feel of this one when you're playing it is obviously your warfare is going on mostly in Europe, but the Axis powers in particular will be trying to, as hard as they can, to expand outside of Europe into other places. Of course, historically speaking, this was the truth. The battle is obviously going to be focused in here, so you're going to be feeling more of a focus on the European map. But you're going to see with proper play, it depends on the skill level of your players, you're going to see battle in other places. And you can see some, particularly if you play the global scenario, which I have not been able to do, but you're definitely going to see a much more broader scope, and places that were not necessarily involved in the real war will be involved. But for Europe 1940, of course, this is going to be a bit more zoomed in on the European map. And so sea operations are going to be a little less, well, a lot less important than Pacific. You are still going to have a very active air battle because Europe also had active air battles. It'll be a little different than, of course, on a Pacific map or in the original Axis and Allies, which included the Pacific map but had zones that were, at least as far as I'm remembering, zones that were bigger. Now here's what you get in the box. You get these nice containers full of the powers of each power's units. And these are fantastic units. I've got them in boxes, so I'm going to use the magic of film to set up some for you. And there we go. Alright, here I dumped out all of the Axis units. You can see they're really dark and evil black. You've got some British units here. Those are those are American units. I'm sorry. Those are the United States units. Green. I didn't get out all of the units. You do have the United Kingdom, which I can just quickly show you. It's kind of a tan. France is a blue. You have Italy and the Soviet Union. And so the one thing I'm just going to immediately say as a nitpick here is I really do not like the color differentiation between Italy and the Soviet Union. You can tell the difference. The Soviet Union's a little reddish and Italy's a little brown. But this map, when you play this game, it's going to be chock full of units. And it is feasible to have Italy and the Soviet Union bumping up against each other. It's not, it can happen. It definitely can happen. Because the Italian player is their own player, is a player in its own right, although it would get far less IPCs than Germany. So the German player is obviously going to have the lion's share of the units and the IPCs. But it could happen that the Soviet Union and Italy will be butting up against each other, or at least adjacent to one another. And I do not like that they made those colors so close. What is cool about these pieces are the deviations in style for the same type of unit here. Oh, well, that's not the same type. This is a transport. See, and that's not the same type there. But let me get one that is. So you've got your two tanks, for example, Soviet Union versus England. Let me throw in a Panzer there because everybody loves the Panzer, right? And you can see the Panzer's got a really long barrel, more tread to it. The UK, or the United States, a little up and curved, while the Soviet Union's a little different, maybe sleeker looking with a bit of different molds. So that's really neat. They went the extra mile and actually made the pieces look different. So that does help differentiate the Italian and the Soviet Union. Even the infantry, which you would think, you know, infantry, who's going to be looking at those? Whoop, I dropped him. So even the infantry, however, will look a little bit different. just a little bit. You can see the helmets are different. I mean, if you're really looking. But yeah, they're definitely different. So that's a nice touch, right? That's a really nice touch as far as Axis and Allies is concerned. So the pieces, everything's wonderful in that sense. You get your regular production board in order to keep track of your IPCs. You get this, which is to help to think about the different roles. So it's a nice on a glance for attacker and defender. So what roles? And of course, sometimes defense is going to be different than attack for a unit. So you are going to see that reflected in the defender and attacker side, which is nice, again, at a glance, to be able to do that. This is a fairly... It's hard to call Axis and Allies a complex game. It is a game with a lot of things going on at the same time, because your units, it's not Risk, obviously, if you've never played Axis and Allies. For those who have played Axis and Allies, this is all going to just come, you're going to know exactly what I'm going to say. So it hasn't changed that much. There's some notable differences, which I'll show you, and I'll talk about how I feel about those. But for those of you who've never played Axis and Allies, it is a game sort of like Risk in a sense that it is a territorial control game. Obviously, an alliance-based territorial control game based on World War II, the historic conflict of World War II. I'll put it back up here for Europe, where you will be moving different types of units with different movement rates. For example, tanks are faster. Tanks and mobile infantry are faster than regular infantry, and bombers, tactical bombers, and fighters can fly over controlled areas and are also faster than your land forces. You're going to have sea forces of aircraft carriers, transports, battleships, and cruisers, and subs. So there's a wide variety of historically based weaponry that will all have slightly different superpowers. For example, slightly different powers. For example, infantry are your standard, and they don't really have too much of a power, although from the olden days they have added an artillery piece. There we go. Have added an artillery piece that can be used to increase the roll hit percentage of infantry in a combined arm. So that's something new from the olden days, something that I did not remember and had to learn about. The other thing, some of the more traditional things that they had were things like blitzing, where a tank, it could go into an empty place and then continue on, taking control of a place but continuing on if there were nobody there to fight. So that's something that tanks can do. You obviously have aircraft carriers, which can hold aircraft and act as mobile air bases. You have strategic bombers, which will bomb the IPCs and factories of a side, so reduce their ability to build more units, which is obviously something that you're trying to do. Deny your opponent the ability to build more units. You now have tactical bombers, which again, I'm not sure I remember from the olden days, and these have the ability to match with blitzes, match with tanks, and help them fight better. And again, it's a type of combined arms with tanks. And that's a nice addition. They also, if you're using the Pacific rules, you can dive bomb with those. I mean, you could do that with Europe too, but that came into being during the Pacific rules. And then you have fighters, which fighters can, again, fly and attack other air units. So they're better at attacking other air units than they are at other things. So the units all have their roles, which is a really nice thing. And again, in a way to simulate World War II, you're going to be producing them and trying to spread out and taking over. Of course, the objective of the game depends on what side you're going to be. Like I said, this obviously, like World War II, is alliance-based. So you're going to have Germany, Italy as one alliance, and you're going to have the Soviet Union, which will come in later, France and the United Kingdom, which will start the game at war with Germany, and then the United States, which is over here. There you are. And they start the game not at war. So they will come in later. That has some implications that I will talk about as far as how you play this game. You can play this with everybody controlling a different side, except for the person who controls France will also control the United States, but then everybody else can control a different side. So you can have a person playing the United Kingdom, France and the United States, Italy, Germany, and the Soviet Union. And so you can have 2 to 5 players is what they suggest, right? So United States and France, Germany, Italy, United Kingdom, Soviet Union. That's what I was saying there. And it does work out in a way just like the original game, just like the original World War I, the actual World War I, World War II. I'm sorry. You're going to see Germany have the offensive here. They're going to be the ones trying to take over the most territory. So the Axis have to get 8 different capital zones, which are the red ones, without losing their 2 main capital zones of Berlin and Rome. And the Allies have a little bit of a different, I wouldn't say easier, it's not necessarily easier, although my father always said of the old Axis and Allies that the Axis had a much harder time winning. Who knows if that was true or not. But the Allies have to hold Rome and Berlin for until the end of a turn, until an entire turn passes. So that's a different victory. It is asymmetric. And like I said, you start the game with the Soviet Union and the United States not in it. So the game will change as time goes on. On the map, you can see different numbers. These are IPCs. These are your money, basically. So the more you conquer, some of them are going to be worth a lot more, typically for your industrialized zones, but then others will be worth less and more as you get into Russia. And so the more you conquer, the more you will be able to build. And so this is something that you're trying to do, is deny territory. You also saw the addition in this one, and these are really nice additions, of naval bases, which can be built. Oh, I don't think you can see that. So let me bring it up. Naval bases, which can be built in they're little cardboard chits that look like anchors. These can be built to repair your navies and give navies extra movement when they're abroad. So that's kind of nice. They give you a nice little bonus when they're adjacent to navies. The same is true with airfields that can be built and placed on the map. These are really nice additions because they do help you get bonuses as you push in or push out into territories. This was something that was missing in the olden versions of it became sort of a war of attrition with whoever had the most and put them in the right area. You were going to have a little bit different. Obviously, you're going to have a little bit of a better time. Obviously, this is a dice-based game, so luck is going to be a huge factor, just like any dice-based game. However, you can mitigate that with proper combined arms, with having, for example, cannon fodder, such as having a lot of infantry to protect your more expensive troops like your tanks and things like that. It is a system similar to, if any of you have played Twilight Imperium, the 3rd edition, where you have rounds of attack and defense, and where the attacker and the defender will then pick the units that were damaged and remove them. So you can, like I said, throw out a cannon fodder in order to protect a more expensive unit. So let me pause for just a moment, and then I'm going to zoom in and show you some key changes on the map. Axis and Allies, speaking of rolls, has always been one of these weird games where you actually try to roll lower in order to hit. So that's something that's kind of interesting. You're trying to roll under a certain number. And let me show you something on the map here. You can see some changes here. This says Yugoslavia, pro-Allies, if you can read that all right. It's a little hard to read from your vantage point. These are such huge maps that it's very difficult. Let me give you one sort of straight down here in Africa. There we go. Angola. And it's got a little man with 2 next to it. These are an addition that I'm pretty sure were not in the original version. Like I said, it's been a long, long time, but it's an addition that I believe they put in recently, I think with Pacific. But these are neutral countries, or pro one country, pro the other country. Neutral countries, those that enter it will immediately have to fight a battle with 2 units or whatever is printed on there. Let me go back up to Yugoslavia so you can see that one. I said that one was pro-Allies, so if the Allies enter Yugoslavia, they do not have to do that. But if the Axis enters Yugoslavia, they will have to fight 5 units, 5 infantry. So these are kind of neat. They act as a sort of bit of a roadblock, so it does prevent some of that early Axis just spilling out all over the place. But on the other hand, this is something that I had a bit of difficulty thinking about back and forth. On the other hand, it does weed out some precious units and lead to a slightly longer game. You're going to have now neutral battles to fight. But what it does add that I think is kind of neat is the option, if you just have a different sort of strategy, the option to not take the war to places where either they, in the real World War II, they went or they did not go. So for example, you have Spain, which has a 6, it's worth 2 IPCs and has a 6 neutral units in it. You could decide, if you were the Allies or the Axis, that you want to invade Spain. So maybe if you're trying to liberate France, rather than come around or go through Normandy or come through southern France and Italy, maybe you want to go through Spain, not only getting IPCs in the process, but also having a foothold there on Europe, say if you're the United States or the United Kingdom, depending on how the war was going. Perhaps the Axis player has really fortified here, and you have no other way, fortified all of France or something of this nature, and holding you off from an amphibious landing, so you want to go through Spain. So these are choices that you can make to go places that were either ahistoric or historic, depending on what you want to do. You could ignore the Balkans and Greece if you wanted to, if it's proves these are obviously fairly difficult. If you're going through, for example, if you're the Axis, you're going to have to go through Yugoslavia and Greece if you want to take those. Those are both pro-Allies, whereas Bulgaria will join you as pro-Axis. It's not too hard. At a glance, it's a little hard to tell. The Axis have hash marks going this way, the Allies have hash marks going that way. So it's a neat strategic element. There are a few other changes. I mentioned the airfields and the naval bases. There are neat changes that occur in optional rules. Something that some people, the rule book, by the way, is huge. Full color, which is regular for Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast. Now, there are a few optional changes to the rules. You have political situations, which are a neat kind of almost semi-role-playing aspect to the game, where you can, depending on if you have the global map, you can decide you want to do these bonus political affiliations where, for example, while Germany and the Soviet Union are not at war, Germany gets APCs from the Soviet Union in the form of wheat and oil. So it's a bonus that they both get if they stay out of war. So it's this neat kind of role-playing aspect. It's nice, particularly if you have all of the countries in here and you want to have this sort of giant worldwide role-playing game. Another thing that you will see is that research, which is on here, is actually optional. You don't have to use research, and they have changed the way research was done, which is a good thing from the older versions. It was a little bit more random in the older versions. Now you have the ability to buy research dice, and then you will roll to see if you succeeded in getting certain types of research. And they're not overpowered necessarily. It won't change the entire game right away, but it will spice things up. Again, completely optional rule. So those are some of the major changes. The addition of the neutrals, the addition of naval bases, also the addition of major and minor production facilities, which I'm going to show you here. These are basically production facilities that you can add new spawn points for your men onto the board. The major ones cost a lot of IPCs, but they allow you to build 10 units out of these. The minor ones cost much less IPCs, but only allow you to build 3 units out of those. So those are neat new additions, and they provide a little bit more spice to the game as well. So these are your basic pieces. As I said, this is one of those games where you're trying to take over territories using different forces that have slightly different abilities and a different number that you need to hit you need to roll in order to get a hit. For example, I will just quickly show you. If you're the attacker, infantry hit on a roll of 1. If you are the defender, infantry hit on a roll of 2. So it's going to change in that sense, whereas a tank hits on a roll of 3. And like I said, tanks can push through if they win a battle, and they can move on to the next place if it's empty. Now, and I also said, infantry go up to a roll of 2 when they're attacking with artillery. So there's a lot of complexity in the different ways units interact with one another. So again, it's a game I can't go through all of the things. The one thing I will say about the rulebook is it's probably one of the worst laid out rulebooks I have ever seen. Which is unfortunate, because it makes a game that actually, mechanically speaking, should not be all that complex, extremely hard to understand, for me at least. I found this, and it was one of these things where when you're trying to explain the game, you scratch your head because it talks about these elements in weird orders. Neutrals it brings first, and then it talks about order of play, and then it goes on to the combat, which is fine, and all these little rules, and then it has several pages on combat, but doesn't actually talk about the units and their powers until the end of the book. I found that to be kind of difficult to deal with. And also, if you're going to play with some of the optional rules, you're going to be flipping back and forth and looking in that book. Needs to be a place that's really easy to see some of the, particularly the political situations rules, that's someplace easy where you can tell these political situations. So now that you've seen the board, let me talk about how I feel about the game. In many ways, I felt like I've sold this game short in the explanation, because there's a lot going on in Axis and Allies that it's very difficult, unless I was going to really make this already overly long explanation even more long. I'm not trying to teach you how to play the game. So let's recap what this game is all about. Is about territorial control, and it is about recreating a situation that's very similar to World War II. And it is an alliance-based game, which is nice because you have support. For whoever side you are, you will have support. Now, this is Axis and Allies, and it does have minor changes, but the warts of Axis and Allies system, the things that, like I said in the very beginning, that either make people really love Axis and Allies or really detest Axis and Allies, they're still here. The big one, of course, is the extremely long playtime. Not changed. This is why my friends and I switched over to the electronic version of Axis and Allies, which is actually not all that good, but particularly when we were in college, we played that, because it was just too long to play this for what you got, at least in our feeling. For what you got out of the game, it was too long. If you're a huge fan of World War II, it is one of the better games that actually starts the ball rolling with conflict right away. So if you're a person that really likes conflict right away, the ball will be rolling with conflict right away. War is already in progress, and you're immediately going to see bloodshed right out the gate. So that's good. As the Axis, it is going to follow, in a sense, a deterministic path, which in my mind is, again, another weakness, but some people really like that about Axis and Allies. But it is a deterministic path. You're going to see the Axis do very similar things in almost every game. That doesn't mean that the strategies between players aren't going to be different. That doesn't mean that there are not other strategies, or that the game necessarily gets stale after 2 or 3 plays. Well, for some people it will, but it doesn't mean that. It just means there's a deterministic path. For example, Russia does not start at war with the Axis. However, the United Kingdom and France do. So likely the Axis will be focusing most of its power on France. Italy will likely be focusing its power in the Mediterranean, which is what Italy will do. And the Axis will likely take over France right away and then try to put pressure on England. The United States does not start the game at war, so the Axis will be trying to do as much damage as they can before the United States enters, because when the United States enters, it becomes a much more difficult game for the Axis to win. There are some choices. Are you going to attack Russia early? Which to me is not a very good choice, but some people will have a strategy that will accommodate that. Are you going to attack Russia early? Are you going to focus everything you have on an air and sea battle in England and hope to just wipe them out in their capital while holding on to it? Remember, the Axis have to get quite a few red capitals. They already start with a few, but it means that they're going to have to keep and hold quite a few more. Leningrad, Moscow, Stalingrad, things like that. London. So these are difficult decisions, but they will, in a way, play out in a very deterministic way. So this is something that I think has always been a weakness of Axis and Allies, and it has not changed with Europe 1940. What has changed is the focus is now on Europe. So this, you will see the deterministic progression of Europe and Europe alone. You aren't going to see the Pacific in this unless you add in the global war, the Pacific 1940. The other thing, and I talked about long play times, and part of that is having to do with that asymmetric victory conditions. If, for example, Italy loses Rome, that means the Axis cannot win until they recapture Rome. So you can see Rome trading back and forth. Even if the Axis have done very well and gotten almost all of the 8 they need, or all of the 8 they need, but then lose Rome, now they've got to come back and take Rome. It can artificially extend the length of this game, which is something that has been part of Axis and Allies for a while, artificial extension of length, but it's particularly bad in the different victory conditions that they have in Europe 1940. I understand just from the reading I've done that the Pacific 1940 had a little bit different rule conditions that are actually better streamlined and lead to a better game. Lead to a better end game anyway. Now, here is the big problem with Axis and Allies. It looks like it's a good 5-player game. It is not. It never was. And, it's great. The idea is great. 5 of your friends playing a different country, having this great time, simulating World War II. That sounds like a wonderful idea. But on paper, it is only on paper, because in practice, it is not good for Axis and Allies because of several major key things. And that would be, 1, 2 of the sides do not start the game at war. So whoever gets Russia will be sitting out for a few turns until they finally can join the war. And that might be okay. Oh, okay, I can sit out, I can watch. I have fun watching this war progress until I can join it. Except for the fact that the downtime is amazing in this game. For example, Germany will have extremely long turns. They get 30 IPCs in the beginning of the game, they get all sorts of starting forces, and they're going to be right out the gate hitting someplace, particularly France. They're going to be blitzing France and trying to take over France. At least that's what I think most people will do, and then maybe switching over to England. Italy, on the other hand, will have much shorter turns. They only get 10 IPCs, and they get far fewer units. So they're going to have much shorter turns. They're going to be a little bit more naval-based, though a lot more naval-based than Germany, but they're going to get shorter turns. And so the German player is going to be pushing stuff around and having this really great time, having a lot of fun. The Italy player is going to have a bit of fun moving stuff around. The person who gets to play the America and France at the same time is going to get that's mitigating the idea of being the U.S. because the U.S. is going to have the longest wait to join the war. But playing France is not a particularly good mitigation factor. You are going to be losing for much of the war, and you're going to have problems, and you're going to pretty much get France taken out of the game fairly quickly. You can still mess around with French units, but you're not going to be in France for the early part of the game unless you're just magnificent. And then you're going to be sitting, piddling around with a few French units that you have, waiting for your big guns to arrive in the United States. And the Russian player is going to be doing nothing as well. They have no mitigation factor, they're just going to be waiting. So in reality, this game is not a very good game, in my opinion, for more than 3. For 2 players, it's actually a fairly good game. 2 players can play a game of Axis and Allies because they get to play all of the sides, and so there the Italian player doesn't feel short-shrifted that he didn't get to play as the Germans and get a lot of fun. And the Russian player is going to be able to control their part of the war. Yes, it will be somewhat of a losing war in the United Kingdom and France, but it will be one that is at least competitive until their bigger guns can jump in the game. So I think a 2-player game is really the sweet spot for Axis and Allies. 3 players, you can divvy up the sides and still be all right, and still have a good time, I think. You don't want to give somebody one of the sides that's going to sit back and do nothing. Or if you have 3 players, maybe you're going to give them one side and then let them switch over to control Russia, for example, whenever Russia comes in. But I think the best with 2 players, to be honest, because that way everybody gets a lot of activity and the downtime is fairly low. It's still going to be higher because these turns take quite a bit of time. You know, and there can be downtime, the biggest downtime in the old version, and even continuing on in the new version here, is building things. When people sit back and say, okay, I got 30 IPCs, I'm going to decide to be blah, 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 blah. Well, the guy who's only got 10 is going to be boop, 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 and then the guy who's got 30 is going to be sitting there doing the internal math. So these are problems with Axis and Allies, and in a way, I feel like this makes Axis and Allies a weak game, and one that I'm not sure if I had the choice, I would choose first. And here's the big reason. The Axis and Allies system has been exported to a very excellent game, in my opinion, Conquest of Nerath, which is also Wizard of the Coast, and they have taken a lot of the mechanics from Axis and Allies and put it over into a Dungeons & Dragons world where you fight for supremacy of this Dungeons & Dragons world. They've streamlined some of the things, like the territories don't have different gold values in Conquest of Nerath. They're going to have only 1 gold value, whereas in Axis and Allies, IPCs differ as to where they are on the map. But that game, Conquest of Nerath, is for 4 players, and it effectively plays 4 players because everybody starts the game in war. And it's got some nice, neat things of adding in these adventures you can do on the map. So for my money, particularly since this one is out of print, so you're actually waiting until 1941 releases, hopefully again this summer. For my money, I would spend it on Conquest of Nerath because, again, the mechanics are remarkably the same. The units have very similar special abilities. The idea is the same of taking over certain places, but it has certain extra ways of streamlining that. It streamlines the victory point procedure. It streamlines the end game that Axis and Allies does not streamline, and it streamlines the building and the different ways of creating your units. So for my money, Conquest of Nerath is a superior game that almost has the exact same feeling as Axis and Allies, only everybody starts the game in. But some people will be completely turned off by the Dungeons & Dragons theme, and if you're wanting a World War II theme, then this plays like a World War II game. This plays that it is. This play with warts and all of World War II. The Soviets did wait to join the war, until the Axis declared war on them, or until they were going to do it anyway. The United States did wait to join the war, so you know what you're getting into. If World War II is the theme you want, then Conquest of Nerath will completely leave you flat, and you won't want it. So if you like that system of the asymmetric sides, of the alliance-based, again, Conquest of Nerath is also alliance-based, so if you like the alliance-based system, the asymmetric units, where units have different powers, the sides, in Axis and Allies, the sides are asymmetric. You're going to see a different game in the beginning as you are in the end game. So if you like that and you want a World War II theme, and you know the caveats I've given you, Axis and Allies is a game that you should look into. I'm not going to say you're going to love, because a lot of people, like I said, on paper, this sounds like a wonderful idea, and it does get a bit, to me, it always took longer than the fun it provided. How about that? Not to say Axis and Allies is a bad game, but to me, Axis and Allies always took longer than the fun it provided. So you had fun for quite a bit of time, but then there was that time when you just wished the game would end. And Conquest of Nerath does not feel that way and has very similar mechanics in the alliance-based system. So, if you had to make a choice, and theme doesn't matter, go with Conquest of Nerath. Same company, same production quality, very, very good game. if theme matters and you know the caveats and you want to play it particularly with a two-player game, and that I think Axis and Allies makes an excellent two-player game because some of the warts are removed. So if you like that idea and you know the caveats, Axis and Allies 1940 is a difficult to find game, but will be one that you might like. So keep your eye open for Axis and Allies Europe 1941, which will change things and supposedly make the end game a bit easier to reach. So be on the lookout for that if you're interested in a World War II game with the Axis and Allies system. And as always, thanks for watching.